G'day, I'm Bruce and today I'm here to see if I can get this 60-year-old dump truck going. This is actually part 2 of trying to get this thing going. Didn't have any luck the first time, but this time we're going to try a bit harder. We've got a bit more gear with us and hope for a bit more luck. First time I had a go at it, we had all sorts of snake skins and hornet's nests down the throat of the carburettor, which I didn't realise for the first part of the video, I suppose, and then getting towards the end, I thought I'll have a look down the throat. I couldn't believe how many hornet's nests had built down inside the carburettor. I've stripped the carburettor down, cleaned it all out, so hopefully I've got it good enough it should work. Now we're going to put a bit more fuel through the fuel system, put the carburettor back on and work from there. For those that didn't see the first episode, if you look back on my channel, you'll see the old Bedford there, and you'll be able to see all the problems we had along the way, and there are even a few unusual things happen along the way, and we found that we just couldn't use the old fuel tank. The fuel in it was that bad. And I'd say it's probably been at least sitting for 10 years. Could be a lot longer than that. We don't really know. I would say somewhere in the past somebody had tried to get it going and the spark plugs looked fairly new. It looked like the spark plugs, once I pulled them out and looked at them, it looked like the spark plugs had never been run, even though they were slightly rusty around the outside. But you can see all the hornet's nest and everything on the cylinder head there. And I have been here yesterday and had a bit of a look at what I'm in for today, and I might even have to pull the tappet cover yet and go along with a hammer and tap all the end of the rocker arms to see if I can seat the valves a bit better. There could either be rust on especially on one of the intake valves. If you look at the first video, you'll see as we were cranking, you'll see it would suck the fuel down, then it'd blow it back out again. So that's always an intake valve that's not sealing off properly. So I might even do a compression test, whip the plugs out, do a compression test, find out which one's down to nothing, rip the tappet cover off, get a hammer and tap the end of the rocker arm on the intake valve on that cylinder and see if the valve could be even half stuck open and not closing. And if they're sucking fuel in and then blowing the fuel back out again, it's very hard to get anything to run when they're doing that caper. This is inside the truck. It's extremely rusty. You can just see the name here, Eddie. Eddie, that would have been his surname there, I guess. Well, it's gone, but you can just make out Eddie on that part. It is a tip truck, even though at first glance it probably doesn't look much like a tip truck with a timber sides, but I guess if he was a builder, it would have been used for carting supplies to the building site, and I suppose after the house or shop or whatever was built, then I suppose he would have used this to cart the stuff off to the dump. Yeah, the truck actually came from another location, and we had it moved here via another truck to get it here. And when I pulled the carburettor off, a couple of the studs came out of the manifold because the nuts were rusted on. I've already fixed one of them and put it back in place, and I'll just put this one back in place now. I've just got that nut freed up. It's always a good idea if you can put them on a block of steel or something, sit them on a block of steel and hammer them and keep turning them and hammering them when they're really rusted on. It's a good idea to hang on to that with a piece of towel or a piece of thick rag, because when you're banging them on the steel, every now and then the thing will go that way or the other way and give you a good jar. But what I'll do, the other one I put back in, I did put 2 lock nuts on it, put it in like that. This one I'll cheat a bit. I'll just see if I can get away with that. Do it down tight enough. That should be good enough for the job. The mosquitoes are fairly bad here too, but yeah, we thought we'd get down here pretty early before it got too hot. It can get pretty hot. So we had a pretty early start. I've got to watch out I don't ding the thread. Loosen it off a little tiny bit. I'll just clean around that gasket a bit. I'll just stick a bit of grease on the bottom of the carburettor where it screws down. I've given that a bit of a clean up yesterday. I thought I'd come down here yesterday and make a bit of a start on it. I guess the next thing we'll do is before we put the carburettor on, I'll put a piece of hose over here so I don't get showered in petrol back there. And I'll put a bit of fuel in. I'll put the outboard fuel tank on, put some fuel into the system, and then I'll blow through the pump and up through here in case there's the remains of any old fuel sitting in the line or the pump. I better not lose that nut. I'll put that back in my pocket. Just got our little outboard tank here with some petrol in it. I'm just going to put this hose on over top of the fuel line and direct the fuel down below there, and I'll catch the fuel in the old oil container. That should work really pretty good. We've got our old outboard tank with the top cut out of it. Just put that there to catch the petrol. Working around fuel, I'm just going to put my gloves on. I can remember when I was a teenager, everything was washed up in petrol. Anything to do with cars, go and get the petrol. Back then it was nearly all super grade petrol that my parents used. Rightio, we've got that ready. I'm just going to pump some fresh fuel up through the system in case there's any leftovers of any old fuel in the pump or in the line. And there won't be any fuel filter on this system, so we'll just be relying on the fact that this tank's clean and it's got fresh petrol. You can see the fuel going through the whole complete system there now. So we know we've got good fuel going through the system now, which is good. I'm just hooking up the air compressor, and I'll use this vacuum arrangement to suck any dirt or hornet's nest out of where the carburetor bolt's on in the intake manifold. It was covered until I came down here yesterday. So I'll turn this compressor on, build up a bit of air pressure, and I'll get in here and I'll suck out around where the carburetor bolt's down, because if there's hornet's nest building in the throat, any of those hornet's nests, anywhere they build, there's always dirt dropping down. So just because they cart dirt along to build a nest doesn't mean to say it's all going to stay on the nest. Some of it will drop down. So that's what I'm going to clean out now. Oh yeah, you can hear the dirt crackling out the end of it. Lucky I did this. If you look out this way, you might be able to see the stuff coming through. Rightio. That should have got rid of most of the hornet's nest and dirt that was underneath the carburetor. Because it hadn't actually fired or run, like it might have only given a couple of light bangs when we were cranking and the first time we had a go at it, the hornet's nest and dirt and everything would have, possibly even rust fallen down, all that sort of thing would have fallen down through the open carburetor and just settled on the bottom of the intake manifold. So that's why I thought if we crank it again and it does start to run and that rusted dirt goes straight through and gets stuck underneath the valve seats, that might wreck the chance of us getting it going. So that's the best way, is just suck it out. Here's the carburetor, it came off it. And I guess if you can look in there now, you'll see the throat. That was nearly choked right off with hornet's nest. There's still old gasket on here, but don't be too upset about that because there's still old gasket on the other part. It'll probably all mate up again anyway, so nothing to panic about. Everything's freed up before everything was pretty well seized. The pump jet was completely blocked. There's the pump there, it's just a normal piston pump, just to give it a shot of fuel when you're starting up, pushing the throttle, or when you go to accelerate, it just gives it that extra squirt of fuel. All the threads are nice and clean and buffed up. anything to make the job a bit easier. Look at that. One more to go. You wouldn't believe it. The one I've got to go is going to be the hardest one out of the 4. I've got to put my glasses on so I can see something. I wonder, can I be lucky enough just to turn that at the start? Haven't got it yet. Hooray, I got it. It's the only one. It's got to be like that. I didn't put a washer on it because it was that difficult. And it's only an old bomb anyway. I have got washers for the other ones. I thought I'll have to have my gloves off to do this job. Otherwise I'll be dropping the nut, and if it falls on the ground there, well, I'll have to go and get a magnet to get it back. So, now there's another bit of a trick with some of these carburetors and things too. If you can just leave that a bit loose so you can go like that, that may help you start the fuel line. I'm still not sure I've got that right. And you've got to be really sure with something like this. None of the above. It's the old quarter Whitworth. And every man and his dog have been here before me, and they've nearly rounded the thing off. Now some people might say I'm a bit fussy doing this, but you've only got one chance to get this right. If you cross-thread everything, you'll have a really bad day. Back when I was young, one of my friends was a beauty at cross-threading things. You must make sure you can get that started a fair way. I'm still not confident I've got it right. I may have it right, but I'm just not going to take the risk. I'll even put a bit of oil behind the nut. And I can't get a good look down on top to see if I am square on. Not very well anyway. Right, now I know I'm right. Because I've got down on top, had a good look at it. There it is, pretty well screwed right up. I'll just grab a rag and wipe the oil off. So you can see if I would have just put even though that thing looked like it was doing up about 2 turns maybe, and then it started to go stiff, I still reckon it wasn't right. I wasn't going to take the risk, and lucky I didn't just put a spanner on it. Look how sloppy that is. I'll tighten the carburetor up first now. These are just all little sort of tricks that it really is just a patience game with any of it. Isn't that so nice compared to what it was when we went to undo it? These threads were that rusty. I had to fight for every quarter of a turn. It is a good idea too to try and do them up evenly. Same with thermostat housings. They're even more critical. Years ago, I can remember this fellow had a Falcon V8 302 Windsor. Went to tighten up the thermostat housing. Thermostat wasn't centered. The groove where the thermostat came to rest wasn't cleaned out. Did the thermostat housing up, bang, broke one of the ears off the thermostat housing immediately. Right, I'll try and tighten that fuel line up a little bit more. It's been rounded off by that many people before. That's about it. That works. I've got to put that vacuum line on. That's for the vacuum spark advance. This is a bit rough using the vice grips to tighten up a little brass fitting, but that's why I always try and think the job through in my mind. Try and think what I'm going to need. That didn't hurt it. That'll be fine. I don't know whether there's a hose on the other end of that going to the distributor. I think that works better than the battery brush actually. The earth one's always smaller than the positive. That's why it's a bit tighter on this one than the other one. Just think this part here might be nice and clean now. This part here might be really bad. The same one here. This connection here could be bad. That connection there could be bad. So we don't really know, but we'll give it a try, see what happens today. I'm just going to get the cameraman to put the battery into the truck now. This old bit of wire, is that stiff? I don't know whether the inner is stiff or the outer. I don't think the bolts will ever be able to be used without a lot of work. Always a good idea just to tap them in case it's got a short or in case the starter motor jumps into life. I'll get that hose out of the way. Now we'll probably try and you wouldn't believe it, the lights are still working on the dash. That's amazing. You'd think those bulbs would have blown years ago. There should be fuel in the carburetor bowl by now. Yep, that's music to a mechanic's ears, an old-time mechanic that's used to carburetors. Well, you can see the fuel squirting out the top now. See that? I can see it quite clearly here. I'm on the other side of the light to you, but beauty. Last time I tried to get it going, it was low on compression, and you could see it was really low on one cylinder because it was just sucking the fuel down and blowing it back out. And quite a few people said, put oil down the plug holes. Well, yep, I've got the oil here today, so I'm going to whip the plugs out of her, put oil down the plug holes. That should probably free the rings up a bit, It's probably got a bit of rust on the ball, but that won't matter. All these old jiggers probably have that if you pull the head off and look at them. Some people would be shocked, you know, if they've had motors sitting there for years and they just go and hit them up and the rings will scrape the rust off the ball. Or if they saw that, they would probably be terrified if it was some sort of expensive motor. You can see there's hornet's nest there around the spark plug, so I'll scratch the bulk of it off, then I'll get compressed air and just give them a quick blow around the side of the plugs. Then I can whip the plugs out without any hornet's nest or dirt falling down inside the engine. There you go, you can see that's a lot cleaner now, so I'll be able to whip the plugs out now. Might save me a bit of time. Righto, they're marked. Champion spark plugs. I don't know whether they still make Champion spark plugs in Australia or not. That one's tight. It's going to be tight all the way. If it was an alloy head, I'd be worried. Alloy heads, if they're tight all the way, the alloy has grown onto the steel on the side of the spark plug. And as you're undoing the spark plug, you're taking a certain amount of thread out of the head. Something just fell down underneath. I hope it wasn't a snake. Like I said before, I don't think it's ever been... Someone's put brand new plugs in this thing trying to get it to run, and it's never run. They've never been able to get it to go. Spark plugs are out now. I've got my compression tester with me. I can't resist. I'm just going to put a wire onto the positive, the main feed that comes into the solenoid, if I can get a good go at it. And there's another terminal on the solenoid. Some solenoids only have... It shouldn't be able to do that. I've rigged up this new button with a heavier wire and a longer wire, and it looks like the button is connected all the time. So I don't think this setup's going to work too well, because the moment I go to hook it on, even with the difficulties on the button, it's as if the engine is stuck now. I'm a bit suspicious about some of those connections, so I'm not sure whether the bushes are worn out on the starter motor, and the starter motor's poling. That means the armature's touching the fields because the bushes are that worn. If they do that, they can just lose all strength altogether. So we're going to get a second battery and jumper leads and put on there and see if we can give her a few more herbs. We can do another trick. I've got a better idea. I'm going to try this again. What a beauty. It's still in gear. No wonder the thing won't turn over. The starter motor's pretty weak, and we put the second battery on it, and I thought this thing moved a bit. So it's still in gear. I think that's neutral. Everything there's got a fair bit of play, but yeah. I wonder will the step break off. I'll hang on tight as I get out. Rightio. I've got the oil can here now, so I'm going to put some oil straight down the plug hole to start with. I'm not sure whether this thing would have flat top pistons or concave pistons. That means they've got to dish in the pistons this way. All the old Austins and bombs I worked on as a kid, they all had concave pistons. So I'm guessing if you just got the oil can and just pumped it slowly and the oil landed on the middle of the piston, the rings probably wouldn't cop any oil anyway until the thing started firing or started spinning over. So I've tried to squirt oil onto the side of the bore, this way and that way, in the hope that it gets down beside the rings. We rigged up another button. The other one was a dud. This one looks like it came out of something about 1930, I reckon, with the screw-on screws and the lug ends to suit it. So we've got one now. It's not the most comfortable one to use because it's pretty hard to push, but it's actually turning over. We're just going to do a quick compression test now and just see what compression it's got. There's my compression tester. Isn't it a beauty? I've had quite a few before this one, but I saw this one on eBay and I just couldn't resist. I thought it's got such a nice face on it, I've just got to buy it. This setup's pretty simple. It has that for the small spark plugs and that for the big spark plugs and the two O-rings. Most of the ones I've had in the past, you've had to push them in and turn them and hold them in there. This one, you just screw that in by hand, then you just clip this onto there, and you can just stand back and push the button and hold the gauge and see what it reads. La-di-da. That's about it. Righto, we're going to do it back to front. We'll start at number 6. Just got to find my button up here. We're ready to go. I'm worried I'm going to get a boot back out of the end of that switch. It kicked up to 75 when it first blew the gauge up, and then it looked like it was going to drop off, so we'll call it 75 anyway for number 6. Number 5 is a big fat 0. That's probably the one that's got the intake valve stuck open, I suspect. Righto, here goes number 4. We'll call that about 60. We're on number 3 now. We'll give that one a 25. Number 2. Number 2 is 80. 1 to go. This is going to be lucky last. Lucky last became unlucky last at a big 0. So that's what we've got. 0, 80, 25, 60, 0, 75. So we've got 3 at 80, 60 and 75. They should fire, but because we've got 2 zeros, I suspect at least one of those will be on the intake valve, because I can see it blowing back. So, you know, one could be an exhaust valve, one could be an intake valve. We don't really know. Like, it could also be worn out rings, but I don't think so, or broken rings. The oil looked fairly clean in the engine, so I suspect the bottom end of the engine, if it has been running with that oil in it, unless it's been sitting for a lot longer than what we think, and the oil, all the sludge has settled to the bottom, and the top part of the oil is still pretty good. It could be like that maybe. So we'll continue on, and I probably should pull the rocker cover off and give these ones 1, 3 and 5, at least get the intake valves and give them a tap with a hammer on the end of the rocker arms, and that'll snap the valves open and shut. And if there's rust or hornet's nest or something in there, or the valve's just sticky, it might let go and seal. And it's more important to have the intake valve sealing than it is the exhaust, because the intake valves, if they're not sealing properly, can suck the fuel down on top of the piston, and then when it comes back up, it's blowing that back out through the carburetor again. Whereas if it's an exhaust valve, at least there's none of that stuff getting blown back up like there is with the intake. If it's an exhaust valve, it doesn't matter, it just blows out the exhaust. And it doesn't affect the way the fuel's going into the motor, if that, all that makes sense. I put some oil around these yesterday because I thought there was a pretty good chance I might be lifting the tappet cover to have a look at the valves. Everything's pretty dirty. Look at the little oil bath cleaner. And look at that, how pixie's that? That comes off, and that's a little oil bath air cleaner. You take the lid off of that, you'll probably fill up to one of these marks. I'm not sure if it's to there or to there. It's not actually an air cleaner, it's probably more like an oil bath breather. But most of the time engines have got fumes coming out of the crankcase or out of the tappet cover, which is the same thing. And I guess the English wanted to make sure. The other thing about having it at the top, if there's condensation, like a place like England where it's probably wet and cold and everything, the engine, when it's hot, expels air out of here. When it's cold, it'll suck air back in through somewhere. Well, back through here, I guess. When the engine gets hot, if there's moisture in the oil, steam will rise. So the moisture in the oil will come up to the tappet cover and it'll escape through the tappet cover. Years ago I had a 1968 Land Cruiser. It just had the breather pipe hanging down the side, coming out of the side plate. One day I ripped the tappet cover off, and here's all this like white fat in there, and I thought, oh, the head gasket's leaking on this thing or it's got a cracked head. And then I realised, oh well, I'll put it back on and see how it goes. Did a trip to Fraser Island and back and everything, pulled the cover off again, no, gone. But because the moisture is rising, that's why the later model cars with positive crankcase ventilation, they have a valve that sucks out of the tappet cover. I'm talking about carburetted cars. The other ones are probably the same. And they draw any of the moisture or whatever from the highest point back in through the motor to get rid of any moisture in the oil. That's the way the system goes anyway. Things have changed over the years a little bit, but a lot of the old cars, when the rings got worn, you'd see them going down the road, and people used to say, look at that old bomb. Look at the smoke coming out the afterburner. They used to call the breather pipe, the honker pipe or whatever, hanging down the side of the motor. And this is before they had any PCV valves, positive crankcase ventilation valves, that sucked out of there. I think in Australia, I think everything from about 1968 on, they had to do away with the pipes just hanging down the side, and they had to have PCV valves sucking out the tappet cover. This one's a fancy one on the dome head. You can have trouble getting them to lift, especially if they've been glued. Rubber hammer always works good. Just got to be careful not to break the gasket. Look what I found. These valves are stuck down that far. Look how much clearance there is. One here, look at that. The push rods have come out of the end of the rocker arms. Yeah, another one up here too. The push rods actually come out of the end of the rocker arm. You can see there some of the rocker arms have actually left the push rods, and that's because the valves would have been stuck when we cranked it over. The valves have probably gone open and didn't return. So I'll have to get a hammer and tap on the end of the rocker arms right on top of the valve springs, and go ahead like that. Righto, we can see here that this valve is stuck open. Is it going to work? That one's stuck. This one has been stuck, I'd say, and it's let go because the push rod's jumped out. Yeah, and now this one here is, the push rod is out of the socket, so we'll put a bit more spray around that. Might as well do them all while I'm here. It's pretty clean inside this engine. It may have been done up at some stage. A lot of the old petrol motors only did about 100,000 miles. The rings were worn out, they'd be burning oil. Right, this one's still stuck. So as I tap it, I suspect it's going to spring closed. So I've got the cameraman there to line the push rod up with the rocker arm. I'll put some oil underneath the end of it because it's not pushing down square onto it. I'll put a bit of oil on the top there because I'm not sort of hitting square on. Because the rocker arm's on such an angle, I'll need a punch or a little screwdriver. I'll give it a tap on top, I think. When they do this caper, it's a sign that the valve guides are in pretty good nick. Because if the valve guides are really worn out, you'll probably never get a stuck valve, because the valve is stuck in the guide, in the valve guide. That's what's going on. This one's going to be a bit difficult. I'll put a bit more spray around it. I think it is moving. This is probably the worst one out of the bunch. I don't know whether it's got umbrella style valve stem seals or whether it's got quad O-ring seals just under the collets. being a GM type thing, it could have the quad type seals, which are in my favour. If they're the umbrellas, it's very hard to spray up under the umbrellas. That might put a bit more tension on the spring, I hope. I wonder if I turn the motor over, will the piston push that valve back up? The other thing too, I've got to get these other ones back over here that have come back right. I have got to try and either loosen off the adjusters. I'll be right, I'll get the cameraman to, this will work perfectly. I'll get the cameraman to reset. Righto, can the cameraman... It's actually jammed. Right, now I'll get the cameraman to put the push rod under the adjuster. You beauty, it's got that one right. Where's the next one that's popped out? That one's going to be a bit harder to get at, but a fair bit harder to get at. Right, just hold on. Right, where's the hammer? How far off am I? I'll get the punch. That circlip just jumped off the front. Just shine the light back here, the camera. Because I hit it sideways, I knocked the circlip and the washer off. So I'm going to have to try and find them with a magnet. There's the rocker arm. I want to see if that valve is actually loose. So I'll just set this down. I'll have to find the circlip in that washer to put that back on. There goes the lash cap. They put these lash caps on, but a lot of times on engines you'd only see that on the exhaust valves. That's hardened steel, and that's the lash cap. Just sits there, it can't jump off because the rocker arms. It's probably only 15,000 of an inch clearance between the rocker arm and that all the time. This motor's been done up at some stage, I reckon, and they probably haven't reamed the valve guides out enough. And I reckon because the clearance is so tight between the valve stems and the valves, I reckon this motor's done hardly any work since it's been put back together. That's why everything on it looks pretty clean. And as a result, you need hardly any rust, and the valves will stick because the valve stems and the valves themselves, the clearance is down to nearly nothing. I don't think that's even springing. I don't know whether the cameraman can actually show that. So you can hear that one's open and shutting. Different sound. You can hear that one here, we're hitting the spring. That one's moving now. It has been seized. That hose is right in the way. I'll see what other levers I've got. I can push it down, but then I can't get the rocker arm to come back. I can do it another way. I'll just undo the adjustment, see if I can get it that way. I'm just going to undo the rocker arm adjustment. If I leave the screw, if the screw and the nut comes up, I'll be pretty close to where I started with. That'll work out good. Maybe that valve hasn't come right back yet. I'll just leave it there with clearance. I'll give it a tap on the head. We've got another one here. Well, that we know that one hasn't. That one is the tightest one of the whole bunch. We've got another one here. Do it the easy way. Put them over here. Where are we? This one here. It's quite tight. Missed it. What's happening on that end? I'm close. Obviously the camshaft lobe is up, which is pushing that valve open. So that's quite normal. Some people might think, oh, that's not right, but it is normal. It would have mechanical lifters. That means you've got to set the valve clearances with feeler gauges. Let's say that's back to about where its mark was. Which one was it? This one here, was it? No, it was that one. We'll give it a bit of a nip. That one, we'll try and give it a bit more of a tap with the hammer. We've got another one here to go yet. If the nut comes up with the screw, which it will, that means we've only got to go back to about where it started from. I wonder whether the push rods are bent. I reckon that one's bent. Now, whenever you go to pull push rods out of a motor, you don't want the lifters to come up out of the block. Otherwise, then you've got to start pulling the side cover off and everything to put the lifters back in. So this is another trick for new players. It's something I've never thought of before. But before you lift any push rods out of a motor, just watch what I do. You give them a jiggle sideways to make sure they let go out of the lifter. I should have just a push rod only. The push rod is slightly bent because the valve's been that's stuck. I don't know whether you can see that. It's bent up about here. So we probably should take that one up and tap it on a piece of wood and get it back straight again. I don't know if any of these other ones are bent or not. No, that one looks right. That one looks right. When you turn it, it looks right. That one's right. That one's right. That one's right. That one, I'll turn the motor over a little bit and that will probably go loose. What happens, the ball on the end of the push rod, some of them are actually more like a ball than that one. A lot of them are more rounded than that. And the idea is when you wriggle the top, you rattle them like that. That's to try and make the ball let go, because the shape in the top of the lifter is the same shape as the end of the push rod, and it'll have a certain amount of suction there because there'll be oil sitting around it. So you rattle it sideways and very carefully lift it up and hope you haven't got the lifter. Because some motors you can pull the lifters out of the block, then you've got to turn around and pull the side plate off, put the lifters back in if you're not careful when you lift the push rods. I don't know whether you can see it there in the light. It's got a bend about here. Can you see the bend in it when I'm turning it? See if I can sit it on something flat. See it there now? See the bend in it? Got a bend around about here. Got a rub mark on there too, where it might have even been running bent for a while. I don't know when, but it'll be a long time ago. So I'll get this out the way. See how that one there, how I can't turn the push rod. That will probably come up a bit. Yep, it did. That's probably about the right clearance. Its push rod looks good. With all engines, when they stop, there's always going to be some valves held open. If they have hydraulic lifters, they can leak back down. The piston will leak back down inside the lifter over a period of time unless they're full of sludge, which can happen. Now it's telling me that these two have still got a fair bit of clearance, so I'm going to tap those on here in the hope that they come up, that these lift up a bit more. I can't really notice any difference. Now, quite often I see people on the internet, on YouTube, if they're playing around with an old motor, they'll tighten them up. They'll think, oh, they're too loose. But I'm the other way. I don't want to tighten them up because then if the valves decide, if you do get it running, and the valves decide they're going to try and work their way closed, they can't, because then all of a sudden the rocker arms are too tight. So you need to leave them there with that play. And see if there's hornet's nest or dirt or something under there. It's hard to tell. I have got feeler gauges there, but I didn't go to the trouble of measuring. That's going to be a problem one. You can tell by the sound that they're bouncing. That one feels a bit doughy, but this one here is tight. I'll turn it over a little bit until it comes loose and check it again. Yep, we have got a bit of play there. You can see that's probably about the right setting. Most of this English stuff was about 15 thou from memory. The American stuff used to be 8 and 12. 8 on the intake because the intake valve has always got cold air or cooler air running around it. The exhaust valve's always got fire running around it, so the exhaust valve is always going to lengthen more than the intake valve. That one's gone tight now because the cam must be starting to open that one. We'll have a look and see if which ones are going up and down. That one's right, that one's right, that one's right, that one's not right, that one's right, that one's right, that one's right. There's no push rod in that one. That one's right, right, right. And the one at the end, I don't know whether the cameraman can actually see that, but whew, actually snapped the end off the valve. I've never seen that ever happen before. It will stay there. There's the umbrella. Remember I said it either had quads or umbrellas? There's the umbrella seal. If that stayed there, you could possibly run it on 5 cylinders. Just watch it and see if it doesn't fall down. We can't pull that push rod out. But we can try and put this push rod back in. We can try and tap it a bit straighter. Put it back in. We're probably not going to do any good with this one. I thought the piston might even push that valve back up, but I can put that in there. No, that valve is stuck down there fast. It may still run, but it may still only run on 4 cylinders out of 6. I'll see if I can straighten that other push rod a little bit. Well, we've come this far now, so go to the comment section, leave a comment on whether you think it's going to run on 4 cylinders or not. Well, it won't be perfect, but we'll put it back in then. I'm going to drop that down, and I can feel, if you can hear that, that's me lifting the lifter up. I'm lifting the lifter off the cam. That's a sign you've still hooked up to your lifter. Good used set of leads. Right, are we ready for a try? It's still doing its old stunt blowing back through the carburettor. Probably because that valve actually that's an exhaust valve that's stuck open, that one there, so there must be one of these other ones on the intake. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake. Could be that one, it's got a fair bit of play in it. Then we go up here again, and then we've got another two intakes here. There and there. Could be that one, it's got a big heap of slack. I'm just checking for leads, starter motor leads, earth leads, to see if there's anywhere that's getting pretty hot. The old starter solenoid is pretty hot inside the chassis there, it's quite hot. It sounded a little bit too far advanced to me, so I've just pulled the distributor back a bit. Too far advanced, but we're getting a few bangs out of it now. So I'm going to bring that back a little bit, give it another go. Got to watch out this doesn't boot me. Well, I don't normally do things like this, but I'm going to try rigging the batteries up on 24 volts, so it's getting 24 volts, and see if we can spin it over a bit quicker. The starter's pretty weak on it. Negative to positive, and positive to negative. And then our other wire is going to go positive right then, we've got that right. Righto. We've got our button here now, which is going to get the 24 volts. So well. Button's not working. Well, very close to running, but now I think the starter motor might have died. It's the solenoid must have burned out. But are you ready? Can you advance up a little bit? Can you advance up a little bit more? Just retard it back just a whisker. You can tell the valves in that are pretty bad on it. Look at the screwdriver glowing red hot. I think that's the end. Look at the screwdriver, just red hot. Can you see it glowing red hot? See it there? It's glowing red hot. I can see it on my side. See it glowing red now. It's hot. It's drawing a lot of amps, that is for sure. You want to tow it? Hook the chain on, get the tractor. No. No. It's too hot again. Well, I reckon I gave it my best shot, and the solenoid, it packed it in. Then I'd say, well, the starter motor wasn't great to start with, but I think the starter motor's pretty well died now. And it was drawing that many amps in the end there. It was welding the screwdriver on. I could hardly pull the screwdriver off the back of the solenoid. So it did try and run, but not very nice. No, so I think we'll just have to say that's the end for the Bedford. If anybody needs any Bedford parts, if they could get in contact with us fairly quickly, we're going to pull some things off. We're going to pull the headlights out. We're going to pull the badge off. We're going to pull the mirrors off. If there's any other parts, we'll probably pull the door handles and window winders off for one of our other friends that's got a Bedford. I would say she's probably going to end up down at the scrap metal yard. She's probably going to come back as a few tool boxes, or who knows, washing machines, stoves, cars, could be anything. That's probably about it for this video. So until next time, thanks very much for watching.